Last week we started with little faith and turn away. Now, do you guys remember what happened with turn away in general? If we had to summarize. Christian and hopeful are walking. They run into a guy that was being wrapped up by 7 devils, right? So what did that picture? Remember? Anyway? That was the idea of this guy that was walking. Remember, we said he was pretty advanced in his walk. He's as advanced as Christian and hopeful, obviously. And he was, at some point, given over to sin. He gave himself to the schemes of the devil. He gave himself over to temptation. And they wrapped him up and they took him back. He was an apostate, remember? And they took him back and he was on the short road to hell. And the idea is, very simply, that he had been given over. That he gave himself over and God had given him over. Those two things usually go hand in hand, kind of like Pharaoh. And so that he was just given over and he was taken to the pit of hell right away. His destiny was sure. And as they were talking about this, Christian says, that reminds me of a story of little faith. Now, what do you remember about little faith? Was everyone here last week? So little faith, remember, he was the one, there was Broadway Gate and there was Dead Man's Lane. And little faith decided, when he saw a Dead Man's Lane, he decided to take a nap. Speaking of dumb things to do, right? So he decides to take a nap at the junction of Broadway Gate and Dead Man's Lane, right? And so he sleeps at one of the worst possible places. And the picture there is Broadway Gate being the self-dependence, self-reliance. It's whatever puts you away from God. It's the opposite of the narrow way. And so he decides to sleep in regards to his faith. He's not making progress. He decides to just take a break from holiness. And for a while there, he's just not reliant on God. He's not making progress. And then remember what he said is he gets up, he realizes his error, and then he goes to get back on the right way and start making progress again. But in the meantime, while he was doing that, when he woke up, what he found was he was surrounded by 3 brothers, mistrust, guilt, and faint heart, right? And these 3 brothers were trying to convince him not to make any progress. He was stuck. They said, give us all your money. Give us everything you have. Basically, they were saying, give up your faith. You screwed up. Remember, we have guilt telling him, you screwed up beyond belief. This is unbelievable what you just did. And faint heart telling him, you might as well forget it because nobody cares about you. And mistrust says, well, you can't do this anyways, right? No one's in this for you anymore. And so they're all trying to convince him. And then they start beating him on the ground. He refuses to give up his money. That was the key thing. He refused to turn over. Remember, turn away said, okay, you got me. Take me away. Little faith says, I don't want to do that. Now the problem was little faith had nothing to fight with. He was just stuck. He refused to do what they wanted, but he didn't have anything that he could do in response, and so he just sits. And they beat him to the ground. And it looked like he was at an end, his journey would be at an end, but then great grace is heard. And that scatters these 3 brothers, they get rid of him. And then we see that as we ended, little faith gets up, and he kind of hobbles along. So he doesn't stop. That's what's key. Anyone that's stopping or going the opposite direction is bad news. But little faith doesn't do that. Little faith gets up and he starts hobbling away. But the difference is he's just hobbling. He's not really moving. He's not really walking with any kind of purpose. He's kind of he's making progress. He knows where he's going, but he's doing it weakly. He's trying to do it with his own strength. He's trying to do his own thing. Okay, that's where we left off. Does that make sense? So, that leads to a very long, extended discussion about little faith, specifically about little faith, not about turn away, although turn away is the backdrop, really, and to be honest with you, ignorance is too, but that's more complicated. But little faith is seen as, the question is, who makes progress on this road? What does it look like? How can it be different? What do we think about people that we see there? And then the other question is, how do we get to this finish line? Because the big question that we're going to have is, why do we talk about this? Why is this even important to Bunyan? And this is at a time where people are being thrown into prison for their faith, and that usually causes one of two reactions. We see this in the first century church as well, as people saying, you got to be hardcore. If you weren't thrown into prison, then you're not a real believer, right? And then there's the opposite where, well, you know what, everybody's weak, so we just have to be accommodating to everybody. And those are the two ends of the spectrum in terms of those persecution times, and we got to find out what's true. And so Bunyan takes his time, even though he's in prison doing this, he's actually writing about someone that's weak in faith, little faith. He's very weak, but he still has faith. And this is what this discussion is going to be. And there's really two aspects to it. One's going to be who perseveres us to the end, and then second part, what do we think of ourselves in regards to who perseveres us to the end. Okay, and that's our breakdown. So let's start reading. Hopeful says, but did they take from him all that he ever had? So talking about little faith. Christian said, no, the place where his jewels were, they never ransacked, so those he kept still. But as I told, the good man was much afflicted for his loss, and the thieves got most of his spending money. So now we're given two kind of things. We're actually going to be given a third here in a second too. There's a difference between jewels, and there's a difference between spending money. Jewels and spending money. Okay? So the jewels will be considered anything that's precious, promises, eternal value. They're things that are going to last. Right? If you look at jewels, gold and so on, those things are generally inherently valuable to us as people, right? Because of the rarity of it, because they don't come very often. And so jewels are these promises. In Ephesians, you can read through, there's a ton of them. He's blessed us with every spiritual blessing. We have redemption through his blood, forgiveness of sins. He made us to abound. He made us to know the mystery of his will. We have obtained inheritance. All these different kind of things that God has blessed us with, those are our jewels. They don't lose their value ever. They're always precious. They're always important. And who are these jewels given to? Well, believers, God's people. Okay? So when we see that Hopeful asks, did they take everything? Christian says, no, they left the jewels. They couldn't get to them. Okay? That's telling you that he still retained these promises. They could not disqualify him from being part of God's people. He still had the blessings. He still had eternity with God. But they had his spending money. Okay? So the jewels are the promises, the eternal promises. Then what do you think is the spending money? Let's back up. What's the difference between jewels and spending money?
God gives us every generation, and spending money is the fruits of what we do.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. What else? Jewels are the things that God gives us at regeneration, and spending money as a fruit. Okay?
So spending money is something taken
True.
and stolen. So the thieves break in and steal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the jewels would be like what he said is that what we get from the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, or something, something
Yeah.
from God, maybe salvation, which can never be taken.
Okay. Yeah.
So spending money might be what we have or what we can develop that could be stolen, which might be also our talents
Okay.
or abilities that we have that we should be using to the glory of God. But
True. I don't know if I would say that talents can be taken, but I think you're on the right track. Because when do we most use our talents? When do we most use our spiritual gifts? Hmm?
When we're close to the Lord.
Yeah. Exactly, right? When we're trusting him, when we're loving him the most, when we're motivated by him, when we can see heaven fully, we tend to engage. Everybody does, right? That's why you watch sports teams. There's a huge difference at halftime when they come out and they got the inspiring talk from the Gipper, right? And what do? And all of a sudden that belief that they can win, that focus on the goal, all of a sudden becomes infectious to the whole team. You see the whole team all of a sudden move forward, right? We've seen that on a human level. The same kind of thing when we are most clear on what God desires of us, when we're most desiring to please him, is when we engage to use our gifts. Make sense? So spending money isn't so much the gifts we use as it is the assurance the motivation, the things that God gives us to make this journey pleasant. Does that make sense? So we've got jewels, which are this is our heavenly reward. In some ways, the jewels are of no value until we get into heaven. You could look at it that way. It's not something that we're going to use right now, per se. It is something that we look forward to. It's something that God has promised us, and we have faith that those promises are all going to be real, right? The spending money, then, is the Spirit within us creating assurance. He's creating confidence. He's bringing us back to God. It's basically if you look at it, the jewels are in the future. They're going to be, we're going to exchange. We're going to get the full value, and this is just Bunyan's allegory, the full value of these promises. But we've got to walk this path until we can get there. And so God hasn't just said, well, if you make it, you get the jewels. He's giving us spending money. He's giving us confidence. He gives us grace. He gives us the daily things we need to be able to continue on the path. Does that make sense? The difference between those two? So what we can do is we can lose spending money. Because, as you said, you can lose spending money because that comes and goes. The promises do not. Why don't the promises come and go? Because they are God's, right? And so when He promises, He promises. When He gives, He gives. He doesn't take them away because He said He wouldn't, right? So, but the spending money, on the other hand, is what goes up and down. And sometimes we look at our faith and we think that our spending money is what indicates our faith, but that's not true. What indicates our faith is what God says. But we will go up and down based on our performance, which is understandable, right? We're trying to find the Lord. We're trying to understand who He is, and we screw up. So we see ourselves doing this, but God just sees us doing this because He looks at the whole thing. Okay? So we've got these jewels. Jewels and spending money. So when we said that the jewels are the promises and spending money is assurance, then we see that what happened to little faith is that he was a good man. He was much afflicted for his loss, and the thieves got most of his spending money. They didn't touch his jewels. They couldn't disqualify him from heaven, but certainly they took away his assurance. They made him wonder. They always gave him doubt. They always gave him reason to wonder if it's really true or not. And so if you really look at it, you could say that little faith had taken on a lot of the characteristics of the guys that attacked him. Mistrust, right? Faint heart. He was always guilty, which made him faint of heart because he didn't think that God would really, didn't trust that God would really be after him. But then he'd come back around, and then he'd remember the promises, then he'd kind of drift off again. That was now becoming a pattern for him. Okay?
The word little faith in the Greek was one word that basically meant that God dealt just with big things. Creation, salvation, but day-to-day life, we're on our own.
Yeah, which would be, I would say it's pretty contemporary.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a creator, but what happens to me here is what matters.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Christian continues, that which they got not, as I said, were jewels. Also he had a little odd money left, but scarce enough to bring him to his journey's end. Nay, if I were not misinformed, he was forced to beg as he went to keep himself alive. For his jewels he might not sell, but beg and do what he could. He went, as we may say, with a hungry belly the most part of the rest of the way. So we have this picture that's starting to form. And so he's got the jewels, and he doesn't forget them. He lost most of his spending money, but not all of it. So there's still something there, and it's enough that he keeps going. Okay, but the problem with this is the way that he keeps going. Okay, even though he had a little money left, he didn't try to get more money. And that sounds bad, I guess, but think about it this way: who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills? So how far away was money, if you will, for little faith? Well, not far away. All I had to do was ask for it. So what was keeping little faith hungry? He was a man of little faith. Think about the apostles. What happened with them? When were they usually challenged and called ye of little faith? Just think about that. When were they usually accused of that? In the storm. Any time that Jesus said he was going to do something and they said, yeah, but are you sure? We can't handle this. I don't think that's going to happen. He always has to correct them because he's about to do something big, and instead of trusting him that he's going to do it, they have some comment back, some reason why it can't be done, something that's not going to happen. When he's asleep in the boat, oh my gosh, we're all going to die. Dude, how many times have we talked about this? Nothing happens until I go to the cross. This isn't going to happen, but they get so scared, right? They always do this. And it's the same thing here. Little faith was so caught up in the fact that he screwed up that he could never see a God bigger than his own screw up. And so that kept him poor. That kept him weak. That kept him bland. That kept him with just enough that he had jewels. He has treasure eternal, but he made this life misery. His walk was miserable. He always just went from one place to the next. He had to beg to get through. Now that's a kind of a sorrowful picture. The idea here is he would just go and he's constantly needy. Constantly needs someone to pick him up. Constantly needs someone to tell him to keep going. Constantly needs encouragement to keep going. When you're doing that, how useful are you to the body? Yeah, you're a drain. Now, are there people that are gracious and loving and we have to keep ministering to those people? Absolutely. But should we be these kind of people? It's a key, right? When Jesus called the disciples, ye of little faith, he wasn't saying, but that's okay. That was something that was wrong. Grow up, guys. I love you, and I will love you to the end. But I don't want you to stay in a state. You're in a bad place. You need to have your faith grow. You need to trust who I am and what I'm doing. Ye of little faith was not a compliment. Okay? It was a growth area. That's what we call them today. They're a growth area. Okay? So he hasn't been abandoned, but he's struggling. And we look at these people, and what do we think about these people generally? Because have you ever met anyone that's like this? Every week. Yeah. Yeah, but we're not talking about seasons, because we all have those up and down seasons, those times where we just really need people to pray for us. We're down, we're struggling, God is the frowning providence, so to speak, where we're just struggling to see the face of God in our situations. This isn't somebody who's just kind of down and needs a little bit of encouragement. This is somebody from week to week. They always come in. Back at the old church, I used to go and clean the microphones afterwards, so I just take a disinfectant wipe and wipe them all down. So Ken would always be up front, and I ended up listening to what was going on. I shouldn't say that. Okay, I wasn't listening, but became a prayer chain. No, honestly, I wasn't listening, but in the sense of I was there, but there was always one person that would come up, and every week, just from looking at the faces, I didn't have to hear any of the words, but from listening at the faces, I can't get through this. I can't get over this. And Ken would give her the gospel. She would lighten up. Next week, she's right back in the same place. Same place. Every week. Okay? And being in leadership, I get a little bit more exposure to it. There are certain people just every week, they have to be picked up off the floor. Every week, they have to be explained. The gospel has to be re-explained to them. It just feels like they never quite grab it for themselves. And from our perspective, we don't know. Is it because they don't really believe it, or is it just because they don't really trust it fully? And there's that tough gray line that we live in, that we don't know. God does. Absolutely God does. But from our perspective, we just don't know. Whether it's really a situation of turn away, where they're just slowly drifting away, that's what we're actually watching, or somebody who's just, they've made it over the threshold, they're through the gate, and they're just not making progress. And we have to keep encouraging them to keep going. And so it's tough. And what we'll see, and this is what we'll see from Hopeful, is we can either keep working with these people and put ourselves behind, sacrifice our own the need to kick them in the butt. We can sacrifice that and keep ministering to them. Actually, no, we're going to talk about that for a second. But we can put ourselves aside, or we can do the other thing, which is just to write them off. Suck it up, dude. We're done. If you're not going to be able to believe this, then just stop coming to me. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Right? That's another possibility.
Question that metaphor, but you believe that those people can really be that to the end. I mean, you know, this idea of a carnal Christian that just kind of hovers just in that over the threshold, and is that kind of...
So a couple things there, because that's exactly the topic. That's exactly what Bunyan's trying to take on. When God says that faith, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to pick it up and move, right? What is he trying to say? How much faith do you need? I mean, there's no minimum amount of doctrinal knowledge you have to have. You have to trust that God is your Savior, that you are a sinner, and you come to Him and you throw yourself completely on Him. It's just faith like a mustard seed is what saves.
It's what the object of our faith.
Yeah.
Once you have a little bit of that focus on Him, we say
Yeah, salvific faith, right? So when we say that, you say, well, is there a carnal Christian? I don't like that term because carnality indicates sinfulness in a sense of, anytime you see carnality listed in the Bible, it's always in the sense of, I love my sin. And you can't have a Christian that loves their sin. And Bunyan toes this line pretty closely, but he does keep calling him a good man. So what that tells us is that little faith, why he's a man of little faith, is not necessarily an overt, outright sinner. He's not Turnaway. Turnaway gave himself over. Turnaway said, I love this, I'm going to go after my lusts. Little faith says, I won't go after my lusts. The problem is, I also won't go 100 miles an hour towards the Lord either. I'm just going to keep slowly hobbling my way towards heaven. Does that make sense? So is it possible? Absolutely. Because not everyone's faith is going to be great like great grace. And these are all the topics that Bunyan's taking on. Because we struggle as a church to figure out how to minister to these. We love to see the superstars, the missionaries, go out and conquer the Muslim world, go for it. And then we see the people that are back here and they're growing old, but they're faithful, and we rejoice in their faith. And then there's this middle segment of people that are just struggling to make it by. Can we, as a church, continue to minister to those people? How do we, and Bunyan's not going to necessarily answer this completely. I know. No, but there is something to be going back. And we'll talk about this in a second. I know, that's true. But the idea is, how do we minister to these people and encourage them? How do we make them so that they don't stay where they are, but they also love the fact that there's a possibility to move on, right? We've got to be careful about this. But let's keep going, because we're going to keep developing Little Faith's character.
What's that?
Yeah, having a good time back there in the middle.
I'm having trouble.
But is it not a wonder that they got not from a certificate by which he was to receive his admittance to the celestial gate? So now we have a new factor. So now we have Jules spending money, and a certificate. The certificate is what he got when he came to faith, when he came down the mountain, or right before he came down the mountain. It's basically your passport. Okay, it is the demonstration of citizenship. It is the documentation, the official documentation from God that says He is mine. This is a kingdom citizen. Does that make sense? So this is the certificate. And Hopeful says, is it not a wonder that they didn't get a certificate, that he didn't lay down his faith, okay, that he just didn't get it done. And so now we have this difference between our jewels, our certificate, and our spending money. And don't go too far with this. It's just Bunyan's allegory. But basically he's looking at, here's your entrance, there's your jewels or your promises, what you're going to get inside the city. Your certificate is your pass into the city, and then your spending money is what's supposed to get you from here to the gate. Does that make sense? Spending money from here to the gate, your certificate to get you into the gate, and then your jewels are inside the city. It's kind of a nice little picture to look at, and that's what gets you through. Yeah, in a manner of speaking. You have your jewels with you, but they're really meant for the promises that are coming. So it's don't get too. I don't think Bunyan's trying to create a perfect metaphor, right? You could do that, but then they said, but he lost them and whatever. Bunyan's point is, did he continue to believe? That's really the heart. Little Faith has these promises, he has these jewels that he knows he has, he knows that they're guaranteed. Did he give it up? And the answer is, of course, no. The answer is no. He continues to cling to them. He believes they have such value that he would never give them up. And that, to Bob's point, that's the difference between a believer and in whatever state and a non-believer. Turned away, looked at the jewels and said, I don't think so. I'd rather have my lusts. I'd rather have my fame. I'd rather have the wealth or whatever it was that he went after that tied him up. That was more precious than anything else. While little faith says, no, you can't have my jewels. They're too important. They're too precious. I will not give them up. I refuse to let go of my jewels. And then they beat him down, but he still wouldn't give up his jewels. See the difference? So it doesn't matter how small a faith you have, these promises of God, the things that you cling to, the things that God promises are just too much for you to give up. That's the difference. So while we may have some that are King David's and slaying Goliaths, it really only matters whether you trust that God's promises are true and that you cling to them with all your heart. That's faith. That you throw yourself, you leave yourself behind and you throw yourself on His providence, on His forgiveness, on His character. That's faith. Okay?
So does turn away like the guy in Hebrews 6?
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, and then he tasted and then he turned away. You could do that. You could also go after Alexander, Ananias and Sapphira. There's 1,000 examples, unfortunately, of that various thing, right? It is a wonder that they, as a Christian says, it is a wonder, but they got not that, though they missed it, ready? Not through any cunning of his. Okay, this is key. For he, being dismayed with their coming upon him, had neither power nor skill to hide anything. So it was more by good providence than by his endeavor that they missed of that good thing. So this is kind of an interesting thing. So William Mason says this, what is that good thing? His precious faith, whose author, finisher, and object is precious Jesus. Where he gives a precious gift of faith, though it may be little, even as a grain of mustard seed, not all the powers of earth and hell can rob the heart of it. Okay? So it's good that you see this, because what essentially saved little faith? Well, God's providence. God fought on his behalf. God persevered him. Remember, this is a Calvinistic doctrine. This is perseverance of the saints. This is God making sure that little faith does not fail. Okay? He did not let him fail. He persevered him. It was by good providence that they couldn't take it away. It was God's hand upon little faith that ultimately kept him safe. Okay? But what's the other meaning that Bunyan's trying to get at? And this is the pastoral wisdom. He didn't lose it, not by any cunning of his own, right? Because he had neither power nor skill to hide anything. Because he was too dismayed at what was coming upon him. So what was the problem? What is Bunyan saying the expectation should have been of little faith? What is the expectation of little faith? Okay, you should try to hold on to it. What else? How should he have held on to it?
Trusting in the one who gave it.
True. He had neither cunning, nor power, nor skill. What should he have to hide anything? What should he have done? What should he have tried to do? Stood up, pull out his sword, fight back. Use the promises that God has given you to fight off the incoming guilt. Why does God give us a whole Bible of promises for us to roll over when we sin? For us to say, oh, woe is me, this is it, I can't do anything, I'm so guilty. No. He's told you all these things. He's walked in His power. He's given you the Spirit so that you can trust in who He is. And if He is the God that forgives, do you trust that He is the God that forgives? If He is the God that heals, do we trust that He is the God that heals? Jehovah Rapha. All these names that they have. Why does Israel have thousands of years of history recorded in our Bible? So that they could look back and see who was God and what has He done with us. Right? In some ways that made them lazy, but that's the whole point, was to give them a picture of who God is so that they would trust in Him. How do you argue with thousands of years of history of God on your side? That's the whole point. Why does God give us the promises? Why does Jesus say, "O ye of little faith"? What did He expect of the disciples? That they wouldn't be men of little faith. It's unfair to criticize them if they didn't have something more to go on, right? It wouldn't be fair for Jesus to say, "Oh, ye of little faith, I didn't arm you. You had nothing else to believe in, and now I'm criticizing you for that." They were men of little faith, and they shouldn't have been. They saw what Jesus did. They saw miracles. They saw signs. They had the entire Old Testament. They knew this is the Messiah. He's fulfilling the words of Isaiah and all the other prophets. They see everything coming to fruition, and yet they're men of little faith because they refuse to trust that God will be able to complete everything that he started. And so Jesus criticizes them. Of everything you know, all the tools in your basket, and you're afraid right now? Do you not get it? Why don't you pull out these things that you know? Why don't you apply the things that you have available to you? Why don't you use what God has given to you to build up your faith, to be able to fight out the situation, to answer the providence that is upon you, to help with go forward? That's the problem. Okay? So while God persevered him and will never let him go, his life, his battle, his journeys would have been so much better if he had just yielded the tools that God had given to him. Does that make sense? There is an expectation. Persevering to the saints, I'm not going to argue with at all. God will bring us from beginning to end, and ultimately, he is the one that will bring us from beginning to end. But that doesn't mean I just go along for the roller coaster ride of life. I am to be fighting. I am to be out there swinging my sword. I am to be battling my way to the gates as much as it relies upon me. And that's what little faith didn't. He just stood up and then got cut down to the knees because he had nothing with which to fight. He forgot everything that God had given to him and just basically threw himself hoping that God would save him. And God did. Okay? Very similar, if you will, if you want to go in a slightly different angle, David and Bathsheba. Right? David with all of his tools, and yet that morning he doesn't go out with the kings when they should go out to war. He sees Bathsheba. Everything comes to a crash because he didn't use any of the tools that he was given to. Okay, that whole thing all the way to Nathan and the loss of his child. Yep. Everything. I mean, what dominated their minds was just their screw up. I screwed up. And they had always had the key. That's the worst part, right? Oh man, why do we deal with this? Right? That's the thing. Now, remember our theme as we get through. This is Bunyan's look on life. This is a Christian running, and it's not so much the order. Remember, we're not necessarily saying that every Christian deals with every one of these situations. And some of them you're going to deal with multiple times, some of them you won't deal with at all. But he's looking and saying, these are the kind of things that Christians have to deal with. And our timeline is roughly time going by. So we're closer to the end. Bunyan's whole thing with guilt, recurring guilt, forgetting the promises, all these things, little faith. I think Bunyan's trying to build these things up. He's remembering them at the end of life. As a Christian is getting older, he's been walking with the Lord for a long time. Now is when these things about guilt, screw-ups, recurring screw-ups, things that we're battling and we just don't feel like we're getting a final victory over. The older you get, the more those things start to weigh in your conscience, right? The more you start to ask yourself, am I really a believer if I'm still struggling with the same thing I was when I was 20? You know, when you're 25, like me, right? When the gray hairs start arriving. When you start to wonder, when am I going to really win this battle? How could I be dealing with this still? Now you're at the end of your life and you're wondering, is God going to give up on me? Should God give up on me? Am I not the least of the saints? And yet that's what he's saying. I love those who are mine, regardless. Regardless, right? So you're seeing Christians starting to think about these things a little bit more. And he was also told to look on the scroll. Remember who you are. Remember these jewels. Remember what you are. Hopeful said, but it must needs to be a comfort to him that they got not his jewel from him. True. Christian said, it might have been a great comfort to him had he used it as he should. But they that told me the story said that he made but little use of it all the rest of the way, and that because of the dismay that he had in the taking away of his money, indeed he, and that because of the dismay that he had because of the taking away of his money. Indeed, he forgot it a great part of the rest of his journey. And besides, when at any time it came to his mind, and he began to be comforted therewith, then would fresh thoughts of his loss come again upon him, and those thoughts would swallow up all. Okay, so this is pretty much what we just said, that he would remember them instead of looking on them and just sitting there and letting those be the center of his mind, They would be pushed out by the thoughts of guilt, by the thoughts of screw-ups, by the thought of sin, and he would be stuck. He would just be stuck. They would steal his eternity in his present mind.
He's using the pronoun it here. What? I feel like he's referring to the certificate.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't do that very well. At the end of... Yeah, so they didn't get a certificate. In this case, actually, there's... in this case, but in this means that they didn't get his jewel. So hopeful actually refers to jewel, so it, pronoun-wise, would be the promises. Yeah. I'm not sure. I think he's kind of crossing over, if I'm guessing. Certificate jewels. Certificate jewels, I know. But hopeful said it's amazing that he didn't get his jewel. But the certificate and the jewels are kind of bound up in the same. So it might be splitting hairs. But basically what he's saying is, didn't he remember the promises that God has given to him? And Christian said it would have been great comfort if he had thought about him, but he wouldn't. He refused to think about him, and when he did think about him, he let all the doubts and fears of life crowd out the promises that he was given. That's what happened to him. All right. Alas, poor man, said Hopeful, this could not be but a great grief to him. Hopeful is being really sweet here. He's about to change. Christian says, grief, grief indeed. Would it not have been so to any of us had we been used as he to be robbed and wounded too, and that in a strange place as he was? Now, this is really sweet, okay? But there's a problem to what they're going to do right now. Okay, Christians being very sweetly empathetic, right? Wouldn't all of us have been in the same place? If we have been in the wrong place and we were robbed and we were hurt and everything else, wouldn't we all have reacted in the same way? Is that generally true? Yes, it is. Okay? It is a wonder he did not die with grief, poor heart. I was told that he scattered almost all the rest of the way with nothing but doleful and bitter complaints. We're going to stop there for a second. Here's the problem now that we're having, okay? And this is where they screw up in how to minister to this man. Grief, oh, look at that. Oh, wouldn't we all have been the same way if we had been robbed and wounded and that in a strange place? What are they doing? Well, they're empathizing. What's the problem with their empathy? Yeah, they're excusing him of responsibility. They're just focusing on the fact that he's just, it was so tough for him. That was such a difficult trial that he had to go through, isn't it? And they said, and that if he was in a strange place. What was that strange place? The same place that everybody has to walk by, the same place that you're not supposed to stop. So see what they're doing? Now they're minimizing his struggle, right, by being empathetic. And this is that battle that we have to take on. What he needs right now is a spiritual kick in the butt. He needs to have the jewels placed in front of him. He needs to be able to say, look, do you know what you're supposed to live like? This is not the life of a Christian. God has so much more for you. And what he almost needs is someone to be empathetic but honest. Sweet but severe enough to be able to get this man off his duff. We have to keep coming to these people. We can't just sit there and treat them with kid gloves because they're so down, they're so depressed. In some ways, we've got to find a balance. I'm not saying that there's one way to do it. We've got to find a balance. What Christian Hopeful would have done is encouraged Little Faith to continue in the same path. Okay? He's now become a beggar. Let's keep watching, because here's what he started to do.
Well, ultimately that's for his own good, right? I mean, if
of course.
You coddle him, then he's going to fall into the path later, and you're going to see.
Well, hold on. Let's read this is what Little Faith's life had become. Okay? I was told that he scattered almost the rest of the way with nothing but doleful and bitter complaints, telling also to all that overtook him, or that he overtook in the way as he went, notice he's still traveling, where he was robbed and how, who they were that did it and what he lost, how he was wounded, and that he hardly escaped with his life. So, what was Little Faith's pattern of life from this point forward? Yeah, exactly. Very much. Constantly complaining. What was his testimony? God saved me. But it was difficult, I had this one time I just screwed up, and since then, I've just been trying to find God. It's been tough, I just have these seasons. It's just, I just wish God would make it clear to me. I just wish that there was something more I could grasp. And everything became a whine. Always looking back.
Instead of looking forward, when you drive, you should look ahead and you shouldn't look right down.
Yep.
Forward, you should look
Yeah, there's a lot of belly button watching, right? There's a lot of just woe is me. Always a trial, always a struggle. God's never quite clear, right? And now you take a guy like Christian and saying, oh man, I totally agree. I'd be in the same place, man. That's really tough. Okay, that's not good enough. Okay, this man needs to be lifted up. He needs to have his head put on straight. He needs to be looking forward and not back. He needs to realize that's in the past, right? What do they call the okay, I was going to quote from Kung Fu Panda, but that's really not applicable. So he's got to get and saying, do you remember what God has promised you? Do you know what there is in the gates? Do you see that as treasure? That God is your answer to what happened in the past, and He's also your answer to what's going to come up. Do you see that? It's not good enough to stay. But because of the way that they're coddling Him, and because of the way that everybody would coddle Him, He's left in this spiritual hypochondria. Okay, that's what Barry Horner says. He's a spiritual hypochondriac. He wallows in self-interest, and especially with regards to symptoms of his suffering. His introspective, subjective, and existential preoccupation produces a morbid mindset. His conversation solicits sympathy for his meticulously described ailments, but the recommendation of suitable remedies is met with a quick dismissal. True, he rightly confesses that heaven is his goal, yet for the present his great interest is personal, earthly woe. So while we need to be gentle and kind with this man, he needs a kick in the butt. He needs to have his focus reset, right? And so what Christian and hopeful are doing is prolonging this man's spiritual hypochondria. They're allowing him to stay where he's at. They're allowing him to be, to just keep looking back. Make sense?
I can imagine the crisis that
I'll discount myself in that statement, but I've seen it from everybody else. Yeah. I've been that guy. I've also seen it of a guy. I've seen just ministering. I've seen these guys minister for decades to people in the state. It's hard. It's hard, and it's hard to continue to have expectations, see those expectations fail, but then not lose heart and continue to minister, right? But we do with our kids. That's probably the best taste that a lot of us will have, is what we see with our kids. How many times have our kids let us down? How many times have we seen something in our kids that we think, wow, that'd be awesome, and then they write it off, or they don't take advantage of it, or they miss an opportunity or something. And yet we continue to believe in them, and we continue to believe that there's something good that they can do with their lives, or something that's possible for them. We keep lifting them up to the Lord, asking God to be one in their hearts, to make them successful, to make them happy, right? That's kind of the same idea, right? And so the same thing has to happen here as we minister. The hard thing is, our kids are one thing. Other adults that should be responsible of themselves, it's a little harder. Right? All right, so we have no doubt that God loves each of His own, but He doesn't necessarily want them to stay in the same state. We've got to be growing. All right, now we're going to change our tone a little bit. Hopeful, but we're on page 8. But it is a wonder that his necessity did not put him upon selling or pawning some of his jewels, that he might have wherewith to relieve himself in his journey. So we're going to take a sharp turn in our discussion here. We went from sweetly empathetic, talking about how he didn't give up his jewels, he didn't give up his certificate, and so on, and now we're going to go in a slightly different direction. Before, the theme has been, little faith blew it, he should have been better, but God persevered him. That's the beginning of our discussion. Now we're going to take this change, and Hopeful's going to start saying, but when you think about it, why didn't this guy just give up? That's where he's going. He's now going to be this one that's saying, he should just chuck it. And Hopeful's going to now become this guy who's going to say, look, either you're growing or you're not. Either you're a superstar or you just retire, right? He's got no classification for what's in between, okay? And the problem with that is really there's a single problem with that, because he's going to ignore his own weakness. right? He's going to look at this and say, he's going to excuse all of his faults and say, but I'm growing. But God's growing me. That I'm becoming a better Christian. And therefore, people like him should just exit the scene. Right? And so we start to become very prideful. It's funny, because they went from sweetly empathetic to now they're going to start growing and say, how do we get this guy out? Why is he even still here? Okay? So Hopeful says, why didn't he sell or pawn some of his jewels? Okay? Remember, the jewels are the promises. So what is Hopeful thinking? Well, it makes logical sense in our story. He's struggling, he's miserable, he has very little money. Why didn't he just give away some of his jewels and make some money? So what is the picture that then Bunyan is allegorizing? What would be the picture of selling some of your jewels to be able to get more current spending money?
I would think it'd be kind of like saying, thinking to yourself, get out of this gray area, come on, commit one way or the other. If that's what you want, then sell your jewels and for money and go live that way.
Yep. Yeah. But it's only some of his jewels.
Yeah, you know.
But you're on track, right? What's he trying to say? Well, if he's miserable, why doesn't he just go ahead and, give up on some of the promises and go engage this world a little bit more? Go enjoy himself. Find some happiness. Something to raise his head. Maybe just what he really needs is a good night at the bars. Just get it all out of the system, move on, kind of something, just kind of enjoy himself, right? Maybe just what he needs is a good woman from somewhere. He just needs to go find somebody, right? Hopeful suggestion is simply this, that he ought to give up on his faith at least a little bit so that he wouldn't be so miserable, because as he is, he's so down all the time, he just needs to put a smile on his face. That's Hopeful's suggestion. It sounds stupid, and it really is. Why doesn't he just start giving away some of his faith? Why doesn't he start giving up on his faith if he's that bad? Why should he continue to pursue this? If living by faith is such misery to him, why doesn't he start giving up on it? Maybe he should. Because God doesn't care about anyone that's not a spiritual superstar. Does God want everyone to be David in reference to Goliath? Yes. This is the question that Christian's going to come back with, does God ordain everybody to be a David in front of Goliath? That's the difference. And Hopeful doesn't have that view. Hopeful's view is that everybody should be either David or becoming David. Okay? So Hopeful says, why doesn't he just get rid of some of this? And there's two issues. Number one, if you sell one of your jewels, what have you sold? All of your jewels. You can't have some faith. Either have faith or you don't have faith. It's a black and white issue. It's the Gospel of John, right? Either you do or you don't. Either you're in darkness or you're in light. Either you're coming to the darkness or you're running away from the darkness. There was never a stand here. When he came to Nicodemus, that was his point to Nicodemus. Either you're born again or you're still the same way you've always been. There's not an in-between. You can't get stuck in the birth canal. That's stress. That went a little too far. Okay? The point being, you can't, either you are or you're not. Okay? You're either you are or you're not, but he's making this assumption that you ought to be able to sell these. Number one, it has no value in this side of heaven. These jewels are no one's there to buy them for you. No one's going to make you happy. No one's going to redeem your faith for you. Only God can redeem your faith. You cannot sell these jewels, and if you do, you sell all of them. But Hopeful's trying to toe this line and says maybe he ought to start thinking about this. Christian says, thou talkest like one upon whose head is the shell to this very day. Okay, that loses something. The idea is a chick running around with a shell stuck to its face and it can't see where it's going, and so it keeps running into things, right? It's our more modern expression, you run around like a chicken with its head cut off. Okay? And the picture... Yep. Exactly. So he's basically saying you're running around immature, you're running around ignorantly, right? You're just haphazardly trying to guess. You're trying to grab onto things, okay? Now, is Hopeful just trying to make a statement? They've been discussing this whole time, and Hopeful makes now an opinion, and what does Christian do with it? Wow, that was so stupid, dude. I can't believe you said something like that. And so we're going to see something in Christian. That's a harsh remark to make.
It almost sounds like Hopeful at one point thought that
Well, that's what we're thinking, right? So, that was a stupid thing to say, is what Christian just said. For what should he pawn them, or to whom should he sell them? In all that country where he was robbed, his jewels are not accounted of, nor did he want the relief that would come from thence to be ministered to him. So why would he sell them? He is not. Remember what's precious to him, hopeful. What's precious to him are these jewels. So to sell the jewels is to get rid of what he loved the most, to take something that he really didn't care for. Remember what we said. This is little faith. There is faith. He still sees God as his treasure, and the promises are much more valuable than anything in this world. He may be little faith, but he's still faithful. Besides, had his jewels been missing at the gate of the celestial city, he had, that he knew all very well, been excluded from an inheritance there, and that would have been worse to him than the appearance and villainy of 10,000 thieves. Okay, so he kept the jewels. He knew that he shouldn't get rid of them. He kept them, and it was what we just talked about. He knew that it was more precious than anything else, and so he kept them. We like that. Okay, Hopeful says this. Why art thou so tart, my brother? Okay, now it's interesting that he's bringing this up. And I don't quite, I find Bunyan to be, he continues to impress me. But he's following through now. Instead of just going through the doctrine of this, instead of just going through the story, he's not talking about the reactions. What Christian said, how Hopeful's going to react to it, how Christian's going to react to that reaction, and then how Hopeful's going to react to his reaction. Now, why would you do that? Doesn't he get it? He should just be talking doctrine. Come on, Bunyan. Because we're starting to see something in Christian. Christian is so black and white in his doctrine. He's now gone through all this. He's heard it before. He's seen it. He knows his Bible. Very, very black and white when it comes to these doctrines. And here's Hopeful, who's been a believer since Vanity Fair. He makes a statement that's kind of dumb, but not necessarily completely illogical. And yet Christian just nails him for asking such a dumb question. So for Christian, what are we seeing? Well, that comes from a spiritual pride. That comes from the fact that I already know this, and you should too. How could you ask those kind of questions? Don't you know it's so obvious to anyone that's read their Bible? That's basically the attitude that Christian's going to come up with. I know how to deal with this. Well, guess what's going to happen to Christian when you start taking that kind of rule? What comes before a fall? Okay, Christian's fall is a ways down the road, but for a guy who knows his Bible so well, for a guy that says it's so blaringly and blindingly obvious, we're going to see him struggle.
When are you guys going to fall away after?
No spoilers.
It's going to be heartbreaking.
Okay, Hopeful. Why art thou so tart, my brother? Esau sold his birthright, and that for a mess of pottage. And that birthright was his greatest jewel. And if he, why might not little faith do so too? So, Esau, Jacob and Esau. What do you guys know about that story?
Well, Jacob was the son of promise, Esau was not.
Jacob was the son of promise because,
God said so.
right?
And that it was prophesied that older and certain younger.
True.
Esau was a man of the world,
Okay.
and he didn't consider his birthright to be really worth it.
But that's what, therein lies the challenge. Because Esau, who was the older?
Esau was the older.
Esau was the older. Who was the one that would take the birthright?
It would be Esau.
And who was the birthright coming from?
From
Isaac. And where did Isaac get it from? Abraham. So what was the birthright, essentially, if you wanted to equate it to something New Testament-ish?
the promise of
The Abrahamic covenant. That's sort of seed. That's a little bit different route. But the Abrahamic covenant. True? So the birthright is equivalent to the Abrahamic covenant. What God promised Abraham, then he reaffirmed to Isaac, and then whoever from Isaac will then inherit that birthright. They will be the front line of that covenant. It doesn't mean that whoever second couldn't enjoy it, but the birthright, if we look at it, the birthright was going to be given to him. That's why it's his greatest jewel. It is the promise of God. It is the promise of the Abrahamic covenant. It is, I will make you through generations, I will be your God, and you will be my people. Okay? That's what he said. So Esau didn't consider that promise to be of any value. How do we know that? Because he was hungry. I'm so hungry. I know. You know, I mean, maybe it was kids too, but still, it wasn't worth it, right? He just came in and he was hungry. And so he sold it because he considered it to be of less value than his immediate need. So now, by saying this, what's hopeful considering little faith to be like? Esau, right?
Yeah.
Meaning what?
He was in distress. He needed something to satisfy him right now.
Right. And he considered, Esau considered that promise to be of little value. Esau, little faith, by his life, by his woe is me testimony, is essentially just like Esau in that he doesn't see a value in it. He's too busy complaining about today's life, so why doesn't he just go make the most of today and forget about what's coming up? That's Hopeful's view of little faith. Christian says Esau did sell his birthright indeed, and so many besides, and by doing so exclude himself from the chief blessing, as also that caitiff, that's a contemptible coward, did. So obviously Esau, both in Puritan writings and in Jewish writings, Esau was considered a very cynical character. He just gave up everything to get nothing. But here's the thing. You must put a difference betwixt Esau and little faith, and also betwixt their estates. Esau's birthright was typical, but little faith's jewels were not so. So that means that Esau's birthright was earthly, right? It was an earthly kingdom, while little faith's was a heavenly kingdom. Esau's belly was his God, but little faith's belly was not so. So we already see from their life that Esau was all about getting what he wanted right now, while little faith, by the fact that he continues, he's called a good man, he continues to walk, he continues to press forward, he still does not indulge the flesh. Okay, he's little faith, but he's not necessarily sinful, overtly sinful. Esau's want to lay in his fleshly appetite, little faith's did not so. Besides, Esau could see no further than the fulfilling of his lusts. Behold, I am at the point to die, said he, and what profit shall this birthright do me? But little faith, though it was his lot to have but a little faith, was by his little faith kept from such extravagances, and made to see and prize his jewels more than to sell them, as Esau did his birthright. Now, that's an incredible statement. Number one, you see that what was little faith? In his little faith, he still saw this as precious. But notice what Bunyan's saying. He was made to see and prize his jewels more than anything. Why did little faith see promise, value in these jewels? Because God has given it to him. Because God's providence. God has opened his eyes. God is the one that's led him to see that. So even in the midst of this, looking at a man and what he thinks, we see God's providence, God's doctrine, God's action within the man that causes the man to think. Okay, so Bunyan's towing the line between man's responsibility and God's providence. You read not anywhere that Esau had faith, no, not so much as a little. Therefore, to marvel if, where the flesh only bears sway, as it will in that man where there is no faith to resist, if he sells his birthright and his soul and all, and that to the devil of hell, for it is with such as it was with the ass, who in her occasions cannot be turned away. With their minds are set upon their lust, they will have them whatever the cost. And he's talking about breeding of donkeys. When they want to breed, you will not stop them. When the hormones, whatever, start to go, right? When they're in heat. But little faith was of another temper. His mind was on things divine. His livelihood was upon things that were spiritual and from above. Therefore, to what end should he that is of such a temper sell his jewels, had there been any that would have bought them, to fill his mind with empty things? Will a man give a penny to fill his belly with hay? Or can you persuade the turtle dove to live upon carrion like a crow? So knowing that little faith loves the things of God, why would you suggest to him that he ought to give it all up? Why don't you encourage him to go get the real thing? Go pursue more. Though faithless ones can for carnal lusts pawn or mortgage or sell what they have, and themselves outright to boot, yet they that have faith, saving faith, though but a little of it, cannot do so. Here therefore, my brother, is thy mistake. So here's your correction. You can't walk like this. If you love this, there is a difference. And that really is a difference. Do you love the Lord, and does it show? Is there fruit? Even a little bit. Is there fruit in your life? That's how we are to kind of figure out how to deal with these guys. But to sit there and say, give it up, you can't just be this black and white. Either you're a superstar or you just chuck it. And that's where Hopeful's going. We've got to figure out how to do this. This last section is, okay, we'll stop here. Ready? I acknowledge it, said Hopeful, but yet your severe reflection had almost made me angry. Okay. Christian said, why? All I did was compare thee to the birds that are of the brisker sort, who will run to and fro in untrodden paths with a shell upon their heads. What? What's wrong with that? I just called you a headless chicken, and you had a problem with that? But pass that by, and betwixt that matter and debate, all shall be well betwixt thee and me. So, what did Christian just say? All right, forget it. It's water under the bridge. Let's just, come on, move on. Let's just keep going. What did Christian not do? Right. Or recognize his own attitude, right? That's your underlying pride. Yeah. No, he didn't. He just was like, whatever, dude, just move on. Come on. Toughen up, right? He just kind of hit him on the shoulder and walked off. Okay? So we're going to see this problem with Christian, that pride, self-confidence. I got it all put together. We're going to see that struggle in the future. Okay? All right, we're going to stop there. We'll pick up on page 13. We'll finish it off next week because we got to keep going through this a little bit. We're going to see what's going to happen because what's happening is Hopeful's going to say, yeah, but how can anyone live in this state and really be called a Christian? And Christian's going to come back and say, dude, we are all in this state to one degree or another, and it's the object that matters more than our attitude. Okay? So we'll pick that up next week.